Welcome back to Cowboy Logic Radio. I'm Donna Fiducia, along with Don Newen. And our very special guest this hour is a gentleman by the name of Michael Johns. We have never had Michael on yet, so I'm looking forward to this conversation. Michael, you are big in the Tea Party movement, and we revere you for that. TeaPartyCommunity.com is where you'll find him. Actually, Michael, I saw you on Twitter initially, and we got to talking, and you're a co-founder of the National Tea Party Movement, Tea Party leader, but you also were a heritage policy analyst and a White House speechwriter for Bush 1. Michael Johns, welcome to Cowboy Logic Radio.
Thanks, guys. Pleasure to be with you.
Hey, tell us, I want to get started right off the bat, though. Tell us what it was like.
Hold on a second. Before we get into this, there's a lot of Tea Party things going on. My understanding is that you are with the Tea Party community. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, when we founded the movement in 2009, I mean, there were a number of national organizations that emerged and obviously hundreds of local ones. And the national organization that I'm president of is called Tea Party Community. And we have roughly 200,000 members and are looking really to expand that pretty significantly, from that. So.
There you go, ladies and gentlemen. Tea Party Community. I'm sorry. TeaPartyCommunity.com.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So while you're listening to the show, please go check that out, sign up, join up, and help out.
Mm-hmm. Now, Michael, the problem is really the Tea Party has been vilified. And obviously because anybody on the right has to go not only against any Democrats, but also against the mainstream media. And I'm sure that has been a problem if I'm, tell me if I'm wrong in that department.
No, there's no doubt about it. I mean, I think, I would say there's been a lot of intrigue in the Tea Party movement, but there's also just been a lot of just gross oversimplification and misrepresentation of our positions. It's a shame because really when you look at the founding principles of the Tea Party movement, they really couldn't be more simple and straightforward and logical, really. I mean, they were, we used tea consciously for a bunch of reasons, obviously drawing on the iconic Tea Party of Boston, but also based on the acronym of taxed enough already, that we were an overtaxed nation, the government was too big, and that we were not adhering to constitutional principles in legislation or in executive branch actions. And that really singularly was the purpose of the launching of the movement. It wasn't designed really to be a partisan movement. It wasn't designed to really deviate too much into areas that were maybe more contentious. But the media was very quick, I think, to want to try to depict it negatively, and obviously liberals were almost immediately threatened by it. Nonetheless, we've had, really great political success. We really were, I think, a formidable force in the 2010 taking back of the House, and then, obviously in the 2014 retaking the Senate, and I fully anticipate that we're going to be very influential and already are being very influential in the 2016 presidential race.
The thing is, to me, the rhinos go against, I think they favored the Democrats more than they favored the Tea Party, because the real true Tea Party candidates got defeated for Senate and Congress. There were a couple of them that got defeated thanks to the rhinos in Congress and the Senate.
Yeah, and that was really kind of the nonpartisan nature of what we were trying to do. Is that we said, our goal wasn't necessarily a partisan one. It was also, when we saw Republicans that had deviated substantially from the founding principles of the nation and core principles of conservatism, that we were going to challenge them in primary races. And we've done that really, every year on a federal, state, local level across the country, and had great success in moving, literally even the House Majority Leader, Eric Cantor, in Virginia, who had, literally millions to spend on his race and was considered to be a completely secured seat. So I think the lesson that you can draw from it is that the Tea Party movement, when we deploy our resources strategically and intelligently and are committed to something, have almost no limit as to what we can accomplish politically.
Well, I totally agree with that. And clearly, over the past 4 to 5, 6 years, the Tea Party has shifted individuals out and into the Senate and the House. The big problem I'm having is that it's almost like we put these players in that want to play. They want to play by our rules, the Tea Party rules. But when they get up there, they don't. What's the position from an executive position of the Tea Party organizations on these guys that go in there and then they don't walk the walk? They talk the talk, but they don't walk the walk once they get to Washington.
Yeah, and there have been a lot of prominent examples of that. And we've, really done our best to hold elected officials accountable to those principles and to the commitments they've made in their campaigns. One of the most prominent examples probably, which I think was very heavily covered nationally, was Marco Rubio. We were very influential, and I was personally very engaged in supporting his candidacy for the Senate. And one of his commitments that he made to the people of Florida, which was very important at the time and still is very important, is that he was not going to pursue amnesty, but he would enforce the immigration laws of the country. And, of course, got up there and immediately was drawn into an effort that would have provided exactly what he promised he would not do, and that was amnesty for illegal aliens. And, we've had, I think, a lot of deviations. Washington, I think I've kind of been in an interesting place in the sense that I've had, over a decade of experience in Washington in the executive branch government and the Congress and think tank world. And then, now a substantial period of time in helping lead this grassroots movement. And you're able to kind of look at it from different perspectives. And Washington is a very intoxicating, sometimes even dangerous place. It's filled with a lot of groupthink. There's not really ultimately a lot of adherence to principle. Shockingly, I don't think there's really a lot of collaboration or team-oriented approaches to things. A lot of almost selfishness in the way people approach things. And, I think that's manifesting now in this 2016 race. We're, seeing just tens of millions of Americans, many of whom have been affiliated with the Tea Party movement, who say, we really need like a fresh, clean slate. And that even Washington-based conservatives have really ultimately not been able to deliver. And it's tough for me to sort of argue with that, because clearly we are, into the 8th year now of the most liberal administration in American history. It's taking the country in hugely negative directions, and by every metric that you would possibly measure the success or failure of the administration has been a colossal failure. And this Congress, even though it has been, as I said, Republican-controlled fully since 2014 and now since 2010, has done really just about nothing to stop the administration.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. What is the difference if Mitch McConnell's there or Harry Reid? I see no difference. And John Boehner and Paul Ryan, or Nancy Pelosi for that matter. There's nothing that this Congress has stopped him from doing. Everything Obama wants has been implemented, and he still gets up there and says Washington is broken and we got to push my nominee through and everything else for the Supreme Court, which would be the ultimate continuation of the slap in the face of the American people. But that's just my opinion. I just don't, there's no difference, and that's got to be frustrating.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the recognition that a lot of us have come to, and this is, to the credit of the American people, I think it's widely appreciated, is that money is such a corrupting force within Washington, and that the Republican Party in so many ways, though if you looked at the GOP platform, essentially like what comes out of the actual convention, it's a great document. It's a real conservative document, and it's tough to argue with it on any, economic, foreign policy, national security, social policy. It's fantastic in all these ways. But then, if Congress isn't sort of rigidly pushing that agenda forward, and I don't just mean like, talking about it, though that's important. It's important to make our case to the American people, explain why these are important positions to hold, why they're in the best interest of the country. But then it's also, you're like advancing it legislatively. And, I've been somewhat more than sympathetic, supportive of the Trump candidacy. And one of the reasons is, which, I get pushback, and it is admittedly a little bit of a controversial position, is that if you look at the other candidates that exist in this race, those who have come out of Washington have been in the position of predominantly of senators. They really, I guess you could argue that worse things could have happened had the Congress clearly been held by Democrats. I mean, they've held the administration at bay legislatively, and the administration simply responded by moving into executive orders, which in my judgment is unconstitutional and probably should be in courts. And the system is just really so, I mean, we use the word broken, but I guess it's really more, you would use the word corrupt in the sense that this Congress doesn't appear to be sufficiently incentivized to stop the executive orders, and we now have courts that are so completely filled with progressives and those who don't really aren't serious about the Constitution and its original intent, that we're not stopping it in the courts either. And I can't see how, if you look at the last few years, whether it's funding, the executive amnesty program or dozens of other steps that this administration has taken, that you can say that any of those are things that can be done without congressional authorization, and yet it's clearly happened. And I think that's when we talk about, look, like tyranny's knocking on the door, people can say, it's kind of a little bit of an overreaction, but it's not an overreaction once you have literally the laws of the land that have not been adopted through proper procedural process. And McConnell and Boehner in the House, and now Paul Ryan to a large extent, I don't think anyone has any feeling that those guys are really defeating this administration. They're not.
They're not listening to the American people either, or the Tea Party for that matter.
The most passion I've seen out of Paul Ryan, who, by the way, a lot of people, including myself, held in high esteem at one point, has been against Trump. I mean, I wish that Paul Ryan had the level of anger and rage and determination toward Obama that he's bringing toward
and
Trump.
Mitt Romney.
Because honestly, the first and only time and Romney, that was a disgusting, and to me, I don't think I could ever look the same way on Romney after that speech. It almost projected a certain, you could just see the panic that was. It was like he didn't feel comfortable really even, I don't think, saying the things that he said. It was almost like he was pushed out there. Hey, go stop this guy somehow. And all this conjecture, but his tax returns and just it was illogical. None of it really flowed with any. No. None of it really added up to much of anything. And even now, when you look at the arguments that are being made even against me when I'm making these points against Trump, none of it really adds up. It's like, well, he's not electable, or his demographic supports aren't sufficient. Of course, he's winning in every demographic throughout the primary. He's winning among women.
But Kasich can beat him. But Kasich can beat him.
Yeah, he's winning among. By the way, African Americans vote for Trump 25%. That would be more than double. The next leading Republican as far as.
And we can only hope that will wake up that community as well. Michael, let me reintroduce you. We're talking to Michael Johns. You've seen him actually on the Megyn Kelly show in last week on the Fox News channel. He's big with the Tea Party movement. You can find him at teapartycommunity.com or on Facebook at Michael Johns Tea Party. And you were a heritage policy analyst and also a White House speechwriter for Bush 1. And Don wanted to ask you a question, Michael.
It's a simple one. You spent a lot of time in Washington, D.C. I would assume you've been around the circles. Where is the integrity within the Beltway? And will it ever come back?
I think the challenge that we're faced with is that money is such a corruptible force. I have to say, in the positions that I held, at least, for instance, when I was the Heritage Manager for 5 years, no one ever told me what to say or what to write.
Hey, I can say that about the Fox News channel, too.
I was impressed with that. And,
yeah.
But the reality of it is that special interests in D.C. And the money that drives and the frantic nature that members of Congress approach them, it's all about raising money for re-elections and the special interests that are well funded. It's money that drives the agenda ultimately, and I think it's one of the reasons that some of these crucial issues that Trump's now raising have not been sufficiently addressed by Republicans of the conservative movement. And I would cite certainly bad trade deals. I mean, the position, which I don't think is conservative at all, over the last few years has been essentially that any trade is good trade. That's clearly not true if we're surrendering whole industries to foreign countries or giving away, as we have, hundreds of thousands of jobs. The border, I think, has been a bipartisan nightmare, and as has been pointed out repeatedly, I think Democrats, look at it as an opportunity to potentially sign up tens of millions of new Democrats, which is important, particularly in purple and red states. And Republicans, I suppose it's true, have really been influenced by the allure of cheaper labor or the pressure that big business or other business.
I think the Chamber of Commerce pushes for the tech.
Yeah, I think ultimately that's kind of the conclusion that I've reached. And it's true with these work visas, the H-1B, the scandalous H-1B program, which, the more that I've delved into it, the more I've realized it's not at all as was advertised to us. It was advertised to us that we needed these niche, unusual areas of expertise that could only be found in countries abroad, and we needed this program for that purpose. And it essentially came to fruition during the technology boom of the 90s. And, when you really get into, looking, let's look at actual examples of this, I would point out, for instance, there's a prominent case with Disney that's gotten a lot of attention over the last few months. You see that the actual employees that are coming here under the H-1B foreign visa program are often people that have absolutely no skill sets in the positions that they're going to be obtaining. And the U.S.-based American employees are actually training them on their function and then being replaced by them at cheaper wages and often without benefit structures.
At Disney, no less.
What is this program ultimately serving? Well, it seems to me that it's not at all about niche areas of unfilled labor need. It's exclusively about lower wages. And I suppose if it had been advertised that way and people said, hey, yeah, we want to do that anyway, at least we'd have an understanding of what it is. But I don't see how in any way that these are really at the core, I think, of the demise of the middle class of the country. And this is a country that is so rooted in being able to have a functioning, growing middle class.
Well, that's the whole idea, and we know that. They want to get rid of that middle class. To me, this is bringing down America, which Obama makes no bones about it, going to Cuba and Argentina last week and actually telling people in a speech that, well, there's really no difference between communism and capitalism. You can just pick your own, pick which one you want.
One minor difference between the two. One of those ideologies took 100 million lives in the 20th century, that of communism, 100 million lives. I for the life of me, anyone who's just looked at the history of Mao, of Stalin, of the Warsaw Pact, of the repression that existed in our own hemisphere in the Sandinistas, Nicaragua, and Castro in Cuba. And the unbelievable oppression of human rights, to sort of equate that with a free society, to me, I can't believe that someone of his intelligence is saying it with a straight face, but whether he believes it or doesn't believe it, and is just saying it, it's
an
so it's obviously so, it's so inaccurate and contradictory.
It's ignorant. But think of what you said,
but
Michael.
I'm offended by it. I'm offended that the commander-in-chief of the United States military would make that type of a comment.
And he goes overseas and again bad-mouths the United States. But Michael, what you just said before this last comment, at the very beginning, what you said was, if we just look at history, that's the problem. There's no history being taught. And like Reagan said, it's not passed through the bloodstream. It has to be taught. And this American exceptionalism is not being taught.
Away from tyranny. Reagan, talked about it, that the tyranny is no more than one generation away. I mean, it's sustained only by our ability to resist it. And somehow I think the culture, which is, I think, what you're suggesting, through our educational system and whether it's peer pressures and societal pressures, even the way our work environments maybe are structured, is that every pressure is to not say anything, not step on anyone's shoes or purportedly, or not stand up for what's right. And this country and its system of government has sustained through the years only because so many people have not only stood up and vocalized these sentiments, but they've in fact died for them. And, I think that probably was a fact that was widely appreciated, during the Reagan years even, and has been in pretty rapid decline since then.
Well, I think what really is
so
scary,
undeniably true and so factual,
it is
that if you can't start with a recognition that freedom needs to be defended intellectually and militarily, and politically, you're going to lose it. And there's so many. I mean, how many examples do we have to look at?
But look at Bernie Sanders' voters.
Freedom has not been
exactly.
Has been lost precisely because of that.
The Bernie Sanders voters don't realize what the government giveth, the government taketh away as well. And that drives me crazy because that's the problem. From the earliest moment on, cradle to the grave, now they're talking about preschool being paid for. These kids are indoctrinated, and if they try to speak up,
you almost like with Bernie Sanders. I mean, my instinct from the very beginning with him has been to sort of turn around and say, because a lot of these things, like on the surface, they seem so appealing. I almost feel like saying, let's start with you, Bernie Sanders. Let's start with your income. I think a U.S. senator makes about $180,000 a year or so.
He's a multimillionaire.
Why don't you commit 90%?
97%
annually. Do that for a few years, okay? And then report back that you want to try expanding it beyond that. Because unfortunately, when you look at these guys, the ones that are the, least generous as it relates to their own personal philanthropy happen to be the ones that are demanding the most out of working Americans for redistribution schemes that have never worked in the history of man, ever.
I often say that, like Warren Buffett and George Soros, put your money where your mouth is. Let's take 97% of George Soros's money. We could probably pay a little bit down on the national debt there. What year, real quick, we only have a minute left for this segment, and we're going to come back after the break.
Hold on a second. Let me put it in perspective. Mm-hmm. You take 97% of George Soros's money, we could solve a problem we talked about last week, which was protecting the grid.
Yes. It would take a lot, only $2 billion to protect the grid, and we'd put Black Lives Matter out of business, too.
We could solve homelessness. We could rebuild our military.
We could do a lot of things with George Soros.
All the things we could do with all that money.
It's true. All right, Michael, we're going to come back after the break. We didn't even get to your White House speech writing under Bush 1. I want to see how different things were from then to now, and ask you about your appearance on the Fox News channel as well. And you are a Tea Party co-founder. You can find Michael Johns at teapartycommunity.com or on Facebook at Michael Johns Tea Party. So look him up. I also want to, now that you live in New Jersey, my home state, want to ask you about Christie, find out what's going on there. And what I feel is a huge problem this time around, Michael Johns, and that is voter fraud. In fact, many argue that's what put Barack Obama in 2012. And CARE is pushing to register as many Muslims as possible to try to get Donald Trump out of there. We'll be back with Michael Johns and more on Cowboy Logic Radio right after this.
Hi, I'm Michelle Malkin for Conservative Review. If you are sick of the clown show, freak show, scream fests on cable TV, you have to subscribe to Mark Levin's new TV show at levintv.com.
Red State Talk Radio. Lock it in and rip the knob off.
This is Don Newen with Cowboy Logic Radio, and I want to tell you about the solution to Obamacare. There's a movement in healthcare today. It's a movement of people who are ready to stand up and take charge of their healthcare. It's people like you and me who are tired of paying too much for healthcare and getting too little. Liberty Health Share is leading the movement of people who want freedom from health insurance. You choose your own doctor. You choose your own hospital. It's real simple, ladies and gentlemen. Go to cowboylogic.us. That's cowboylogic.us. You'll see the Liberty Health Share banner at the top of the page. Click on it, research it, vet it, and you'll find out why Donna and I are members of Liberty Health Share. Liberty Health Share, exempt from the penalties associated with Obamacare.
This is Denise Simon, host of the Denise Simon Experience, and you're listening to Red State Talk Radio, the dominant force in conservative internet talk radio. Lock it in and rip the knob off.
I know you're watching, so pay attention. You hate my freedom, my religion, and my country. You hate me for speaking my mind. You try to control me with violence and intimidation. You think you can muzzle me with fear? Don't ever confuse me for my politicians or my media. I am an American, free-born and free-bred, and I will call you out for who you are. An Islamic extremist who would kill me for my beliefs. You don't intimidate me. My freedom is more powerful than anything you can possibly do, and I will never, never surrender my rights to your terror. I will say what I think, worship according to my beliefs, and raise my children how I see fit. And I defend it all with the Second Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. I cower to no one, because I am the National Rifle Association of America, and I am freedom's safest place.
This is Tom Del Beccaro, U.S. Senate candidate for the great state of California, author of The Divided Era and Forbes contributor. And you're listening to my friends, Donna Fiducia and Don Nguyen on Cowboy Logic Radio.
Talk radio the way the founding fathers would have done it.
I'm just a man trying to make his mark on history.
Red State Talk Radio.
We're back on Cowboy Logic Radio with Michael Johns, who was one of the big founding members of the Tea Party movement way back in 2009, which is about when we started Cowboy Logic Radio, too, Michael, because we were mad as hell. We're not going to take it anymore. The TeaPartyCommunity.com is where you can find him, or on Facebook at Michael Johns Tea Party. But before we get into, Hold on.
Before we get into anything, I need to share with the listeners a very personal conversation that Michael and I had while we were at break. Mm-hmm. And we'll recap it. It was very simple, ladies and gentlemen. I asked Michael a very simple question.
Because he lives in New Jersey.
I said, "How you doing?" And what did you say in response?
I said, "How you doing?"
"I'm doing good. You doing good?" All right, so here we go.
So I said, Michael, being from New Jersey, now living down in Atlanta, I had to do the My Cousin Vinny. Don actually showed My Cousin Vinny to his kids so they could get used to my accent when I moved down here. I come down here.
It was a dialect lesson
of all time, with the best expert witness in the history of modern jurisprudence.
Really? And I come down here and I go, I bet the Chinese food here is terrible. But the Chinese food isn't really that bad. The pizza sucks, but the Chinese food really isn't that bad. I have to import my own pizza dough from New Jersey and freeze it. Anyhow, but you were a White House speechwriter under Bush 1. First of all, I have to ask you, what year, when you lived in Washington, D.C., was the water a Kool-Aid grape color? Is that what runs inside the Beltway?
Yeah, I think it's. I would say that there's a lot of what I would call groupthink there, meaning that a position gets established. How it gets established is always very interesting. Sometimes it can. The best way is when it sort of manifests through the grassroots of the American people, as I think is starting to happen in this election. But oftentimes, unfortunately, money drives an agenda. People are, they pour their whole lives into like singular issues, and then those issues receive almost disproportionate attention. Other ones that may be equally or even more important don't receive, really any attention.
That would be an EMP in my book. It's getting no attention whatsoever. Thank God Mark Levin's TV show is actually highlighting that lately. But there's so many things. I guess they have a pet thing that they want to push. I say pet peeve, but a pet project that they push, and once they get in there, they can do it. But have things changed a lot? I mean, Bush 1, to me, would still make America great again, for lack of a better way of saying it. And we don't see that with this president whatsoever.
Well, one thing that was certainly very different back then was that we sort of understood the tricameral nature of the federal government and the fact that, to do things, we needed to do them with Congress, not around Congress. And so one of the criticisms, of course, of Bush 41 was his violation of the no new tax pledge. I would be myself critical of it, and was, in fact, when I was in administration, that I thought that was a promise that was, so crucial to credibility and to the mission. But, it was done as part of a larger effort of trying to get things done with
the
Congress.
Democrats pushed him into it.
Yeah.
They really pushed him into it.
Yeah,
and to me,
it was basically, it was some not terribly significant, but some tax, increases in exchange for spending cuts. And, the tax increases came, spending cuts never came. And
that always is the case.
You go back to, we're talking about the border and immigration, you go back to 86 and look at the whole debate with Reagan, it's the same thing there, where we were supposed to, provide amnesty for several million illegals. The amnesty was granted, and in exchange, the border was supposed to be secured. That was the deal with the Democrats. Of course, the amnesty came, and the border is as porous and dangerously open as it's ever been.
Can I say one thing here?
Yeah, so the difference between then and now is I think back then there was a sense, at least among, I think, Republicans, maybe, and I'm sure many Democrats, that things had to be done in that kind of way.
They compromised.
There had to be some degree of communication and work toward common ends, and sometimes, yes, compromise. And that was just, if you didn't like that, you basically had to go win some elections. And now it seems to me that there is, with this president, not only is there no communication with Republicans in the House and Senate, I don't get the sense there's really much communication with the Congress at all. And I
don't think there's much communication with anything. I think Valerie Jarrett runs the show, and this guy's enjoying himself. But you know what? The no new tax pledge pales in comparison to if you want your doctor, you can keep your doctor. Obamacare is ruining the middle class. It is devastating families. And nobody's talking about that whatsoever because, again, the media has, such a left-leaning agenda, they look the other way.
Yeah, that's clearly true. And there just has been, I think, a lack of recognition and attention of the ongoing sort of chipping away effect that regulation, mandates like Obamacare, taxes, non-competitive fiscal policies adopted by Washington have had on job creation in this country. And job creation in this country since, 2000 or so has been essentially non-existent if you net out immigration. So, if you took legal and illegal immigrants, the number that have arrived since 2000 and the number of jobs created since 2000, they're roughly equivalent. Mm-hmm. So in essence, there's been like zero net new jobs created for the United States. And of course, it gets in this whole other issue of how we report unemployment in this country and the sort of scandalous nature with which the Department of Labor approaches a bureau, and the Bureau of Labor Statistics actually report these numbers, the 4.9% and things like that, when, as Trump is correctly pointing out, real unemployment, it could be 5-6 times that.
U6 unemployment's probably closer to 12, maybe even more.
You have over 90 million Americans not in the workforce, not out of the formal labor force right now. That is an extraordinary number. It's an all-time high, by the way. Yeah. Unemployment in this country is at an all-time high. But if you looked at the Bureau of Labor Statistics reporting, you would say, it's pretty much, it's a little higher than it's been, and it wouldn't look particularly like a huge anomaly.
Well, they don't count people who aren't looking anymore, so eventually we'll have full employment with that, mode of thinking.
And so, one of the things we have to do is just get away, I think, that we have to have a more accurate accounting of how we report employment statistics in this country. And I think we have to have a better understanding of what we want to see in the way of economic growth. The GDP of this country, should be humming along at, a 4 or 5% rate. And it's not fraction of that.
Don
well,
wants to ask you a question.
I don't think part-time jobs ought to be considered employment anyway.
And if you have two, it counts as two jobs.
That's right. So it's a joke. Hey, I want to get back to the speech writing. We've never had the pleasure or the honor of having an administration or a presidential speechwriter on our show. So I've got a couple of questions that I want to ask you about that.
Okay.
In your opinion, over the history of the United States with regard to the presidential history, what do you consider to be the most powerful presidential speech ever written and delivered?
Wow. Because there's a few. There's certainly. You would start with the Gettysburg Address, I think. Right. I think most Americans would assess that. Well, Lincoln did not realize that this 10-sentence long speech that I think took less than 30 minutes for him to deliver was going to be consequential. In fact, his remarks specifically state that the words would not be long remembered. Have actually been, some of the most enduring in the country because they captured so well the crucial nature of the country at that vital crossroads of possible division. And so you would have to put that up there. I think Washington's farewell address has to rank very highly from the standpoint of it communicating the sense of enduring ideals that should guard and guide the country going forward. Lincoln, again, I would say his second inaugural, I think, was, also in light of the Civil War and famously with the malice toward none quote has been enduring. In our lifetimes, I'm a huge Reagan fan, and I believe that the Brandenburg Gate speech was, I kind of understand a lot of the inside baseball about how the tear down the wall sentence was actually ultimately injected into that speech, and it was done without the authorization of the, State Department or some of the major foreign policy figures in that administration who thought it would be unnecessarily provocative. It was, however, the speechwriting department of Reagan and his, really fairly extraordinary speechwriters he had were really insistent on getting it in there. And then, in retrospect, probably the most iconic presidential speech of the late 20th century. If you're going to go back, kind of in the mid-20th, I think, kind of when you look at the emergence of professional speechwriters, there's really, most people say, Sorensen and the Kennedy administration, and obviously Kennedy's inaugural was a bold and well-written speech. It certainly challenged the country to become more engaged in its government and shoot, literally for, the moon, and to it kind of laid out, I thought, such an ambitious vision of what the country should and could be. FDR's infamy speech, I think you got to put that in there, and FDR's State of the Union. Maybe Reagan's first inaugural, I think, also because it was such a bold departure from the Carter administration. The shift in the political culture of the country from 1980 to January of 81, when Reagan took office, was so immensely. It was such an immense shift, really.
How about this shift? Talking to a college student today and saying to him, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. I'm sure he's clueless about that one, though. Okay, go ahead, honey.
All right. You encapsulated all three of my speech questions there with one answer, and it was stellar. So I'm sure I left
a few out. I would have to. I was inspired with the way George W. Bush.
Did you write Mr. and Mrs. America? Watch your wallet. Did you write that one?
One of my. Well, just say on W. I thought the way he handled 9/11 ultimately, and the forceful nature with which the resolve he brought, and the clarity that he brought to it was both good. I thought. When I worked for Bush 41, I thought one of his great attributes also in the first Gulf War was, as he did with the Panama incursion, was being able to lay out why these military interventions, controversial as they were necessary, and that they were not without risk. You know, in fairness to him, when you look at the presentation of them, he never said, look, this is going to go seamlessly, even though that first Gulf intervention went probably as seamlessly as anyone could have envisioned it going.
Yeah.
All right, let me ask you this. You said the advent of presidential speechwriters came into play in the not-so-distant past. Going back to Lincoln and going back to Washington, these guys were writing their own speeches. Am I correct?
Lincoln wrote the Gettysburg Address in his own handwriting, and Washington wrote his remarks as well. In fairness to modern presidents, I think there's so many more remarks and speeches being given than there were back then. I mean, you literally have, 1, 2, 3, sometimes 4 in a day. It becomes, taxing and almost unreasonable to expect that they're going to be able to do that on their own. But yeah, I mean, some of the greatest speeches were in fact written, by our founders. I think some of Jefferson's speeches would certainly rank in that listing I gave as well. And these were just incredibly bright men. I mean, there's a reason we celebrate them as a country. There's a reason we need to continue to, look at them for guidance and try to gather what we can from what they offered the country, because they faced challenges that were no less daunting than the ones we face today, but they did so with a resolve and a commitment to principle and, I think a real great eloquence that they brought to bringing the country along to where it needed to be. And that ultimately is the definition of leadership, in my view. It's not caving to the will of the people. It's understanding what the will of the people is and what the goals of the country are, and leading a country in the direction that it needs to go, and doing all of that in adherence to the guiding principles of a nation, which should always be uncompromisable.
I think it's also important to note that a president should share the will of the people.
Yeah, I mean,
and we don't have that. I haven't felt for 8 years that this man represented my ideals, my values, my ethics, my morals, my patriotism.
And that leads to a dangerous level of political disengagement that allows some of these kind of horrible directions of the country to really manifest. I mean, that's really one of the things they keep coming back about Trump that is inartfully worded as some of his phraseology is. What's clear to me is, wow, he's really listening to the American people. I mean, not to Washington conservatives who haven't necessarily been talking about bad trade or an open border or bad immigration policies or any of those things, but he's listened to working Americans. If you sit down and you realize, like, if you're sitting in some bar and somewhere in America just talking to someone with some common sense, he has an understanding of what they're confronting. And I think the American people are by and large a conservative people. I think they want to see, as he's articulating an America that is leading in the world, an America that is growing and protecting its industry to some extent against unfair competition. It certainly has, integrity for the defense of its borders in an era of terror and unemployment challenges and pressure on our public institutions and whatnot. I'm hugely impressed with the fact that, wow, this is a candidate who's kind of articulating what the American people have been saying and thinking for so long, and that Washington hasn't been acting on.
I think people are just, they're mad. They're mad as hell, and they're not taking it anymore, which I can see. But he needs to get more specific, though, too. He really does at this point.
He does. And in fairness, I think I think the rebuttal there is that, the people that are really clamoring for the policy detail are more media and maybe some of his critics. But I agree with you. I think this is a campaign that's got some rough edges. And I really would like to see him prevail. I think it's almost certain that he's going to be the nominee. I think that can be positive, but, it's only positive if it's successful. And,
John Kasich has to get out of there. This is getting to be ridiculous. Michael, I want to ask you about, since you're so into the Tea Party and you back a lot of candidates, we have thrown our support behind Tom Del Beccaro. He's running for the Senate for Barbara Boxer's seat out in California. He's written a book, and you were talking about Lincoln before and Washington. He's written a book called The Divided Era, which essentially says at the beginning of a country, they have the competition for ideas. And at the end of the country, they have the competition for spoils. Unfortunately, we're in that second tier right now. But he's running for Senate. I'd like you guys to look at him. And he's certainly conservative. He's gotten the backing of Steve Forbes and Larry Kudlow as far as his financial thing. Many of the Fox News Channel military analysts have also thrown their support behind him. Unfortunately, he's in California, and they drink the Kool-Aid out there, and they reelected Jerry Brown, so it's an uphill battle. I keep telling him he needs to move to Texas because he'd be elected very easily.
But California was for so many years a state that was in play. Obviously, Reagan governorship there, and a lot of the political successes that have come out of there. And it's only really the last decade and a half or so where Republicans haven't focused on it as much. It is a state that I think is still, very winnable, and particularly, I think with Trump at the top of the ticket.
I was just going to say, possibly on the coattails there, he can ride in, and that would be a great thing, because California needs that. And there's a lot of people who want to split that state in half. They're calling it actually the state of Jefferson.
That's
they
right.
Want to put it up but that's another story. We'll do another show. Okay, so let's go down with some other people that are running. Again, folks, TomDell.com. If you can check out Tom Del Beccaro, if you live in California, please do. How about Kelly Ward, Dr. Kelly Ward against John McCain?
I publicly endorsed Kelly Ward in Arizona, and have known her for years. She's a physician, as you may know. She's been in the state Senate for quite a while, and I think she's a hugely formidable candidate who, certainly
is he vulnerable though? Is he vulnerable and there is a Democrat candidate that's pretty strong though, from what I heard.
Ann Fitzpatrick, I believe, from the House, is the likely Democratic nominee there, and she and yes, the general election in Arizona is considered to be a competitive one. But I do think that Kelly Ward is well positioned to win in August, and I think that all conservatives should be taking a look and supporting her candidacy. And we are a Tea Party community, and most of the Tea Party activists that I'm working with across the country, and not just in Arizona, but especially in Arizona, believe that it's time for a change there. And and part of it is to be blunt about it. I mean, it's not just that McCain's voted against Tea Party interests, but he's been so personal about it.
Oh, he's actually gone more against the Tea Party than he has for the Democrats. We met Rob Maness at the South Carolina Tea Party convention. He's running again in Louisiana, and hopefully he can possibly change his seat down there.
Yeah, I think Louisiana too is one that should be hugely winnable, and conservatives have fared well. That economy is not done well under Democratic leadership, and certainly that's one that I think is a priority race.
Okay, being from New Jersey, what do you think about Chris Christie? He looked like he was totally out of place standing behind Donald Trump after he went ahead and endorsed him. Did not look like a happy camper.
It looks like his mental wheels were spinning. I don't know how to word it.
I don't know what
exactly.
he was thinking. I wish I could have, been a mind reader, though.
Look, I know the governor, and I knew his Republican opponent when he first ran, and and very close to what's happening in the state. In fairness to Chris Christie, this is a very difficult state to govern as a Republican or a conservative.
Yeah, it
and
is.
There are a good number of accomplishments that he should feel proud of. I think he's a good example of someone who's done a decent job in a lot of ways of defending conservative principles with a state assembly that has been hostile to those objectives, and he's built some good working relationships, so that's impressive. This is not a model, however, of conservative governance. I mean, just to be clear, government has expanded. the tax burden on this state is extraordinary. The regulations are punitive. It's not a competitive state, setting aside political rhetoric right now for business. Businesses are leaving New Jersey. They're not coming into New Jersey. And, so I wouldn't look and say that, he's done, say, in New Jersey, like what, I don't know, Scott Walker's done in Wisconsin or whatever you want to cite as maybe a leading conservative candidate. But you have to be fair and say, look, the political orientation of the state is substantially less conservative than many of these states. And I think he's done, a decent job with what he's had. And the best thing I think he's done is his endorsement of Trump. And he's known Trump for a long time. In fact, the closer people are to Trump, the more they like him, I've noticed. The people that seem to have the most hostility to him are those that have had the least exposure to him.
Yeah, I was surprised about that.
I hope that, I think, honestly, I think like states like New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, that I have a tough time believing Ted Cruz would be competitive in, are very much in play in 2016 with Trump as a nominee.
Exactly. And California's in play, too. We have a little less than a minute.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we have a little less than a minute. Real quick, do you think Christie is vying for something in a Trump administration?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't want to speak for him. I think what he said was that it was his intention to enter the private sector and, to pursue probably a law career. That said, nobody really ever comes straight out and says, I'm positioning to be the next attorney general. But if he was the next attorney general, I don't think I would have any objection to that. I think he'd probably, do a pretty decent job. And, the idea was, to really bring change to a country, it's more than one person. It's about a team, and if you look at the Reagan Revolution of '80, was very much about people.
Exactly. He's got to surround himself.
Yeah,
he's got to surround himself with the best people, which he does.
Needs to be doing more to surround himself with people that are aligned with his policy objectives and can be helpful to him at this juncture. There's a lot of people out there that like myself, see what he's trying to do and want to see him be successful. He's got to get these people, involved in his candidacy and hopefully ultimately in his administration.
Well, we'll have to leave it at that. Michael Johns, thank you so much for joining us. Very interesting to know that you were a speechwriter for Bush 1, a heritage policy analyst, and one of the big founding members of the Tea Party movement. Find him at teapartycommunity.com. Again, it's Michael Johns, teapartycommunity.com, or on Facebook at Michael Johns Tea Party. Michael, thanks so much for joining us here on Cowboy Logic Radio.
Pleasure, anytime.
All right, and that wraps it up for another week, folks. We thank you so much for joining.